Imagine discovering an ancient map so mysterious that it forces historians to question everything they thought they knew about the past. A map that appears to show lands no one should have known, existed coastlines that seem impossible for its time, and clues that challenge centuries of accepted history. Tonight, we journey into one of the greatest historical mysteries ever uncovered. Who created this map? Where did its knowledge come from? And could it reveal a forgotten chapter of human civilization that has been hidden for centuries? Before we begin, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next deep dive into the world's most fascinating mysteries. Now let's unfold the ancient map that rewrote history. The map lies forgotten for centuries, not hidden in a sealed chamber beneath desert sands, not buried inside a ruined temple, not locked away in some legendary lost library. Instead, it survives among ordinary documents folded and neglected, one fragment among thousands of records that have accumulated across generations. It is only when scholars begin sorting through old archives that something extraordinary emerges from the dust. A piece of animal skin, lines drawn in faded ink, coastlines, notes, strange markings. At first glance, it appears to be nothing more than another old chart from a world that produced many of them. Sailors have always needed maps. Empires have always collected them. Archives are full of forgotten documents that once seemed important and later became historical curiosities. But this one is different. The moment researchers begin examining it closely, they notice something unsettling. Certain features appear unexpectedly accurate. Certain coastlines resemble places that should not have been mapped in such detail when the document was created. Certain notes suggest access to sources that no longer exist. The deeper they look, the stranger the story becomes. That story begins not with the map itself, but with a much older human obsession, the desire to know what lies beyond the horizon. For most of human history, the world is small. A village sits surrounded by fields. A kingdom stretches only as far as a rider can travel in a few days. Mountains form barriers. Forests create boundaries. Oceans become walls separating one known world from another. Most people never travel far from where they are born. Yet curiosity constantly pushes against those limits. Long before written history, groups of hunters move across continents. Mariners cross narrow seas. Traders follow rivers deep into unfamiliar territory. Every generation gathers fragments of knowledge from those who came before. Stories become routes. Routes become journeys. Journeys become maps. The earliest maps bear little resemblance to modern ones. Some are scratched into clay tablets, others are carved into stone. Many represent not geography as it truly exists, but geography as people imagine it. Sacred places appear larger than reality. Important cities occupy the center of the world. Unknown regions fade into uncertainty. Yet even these imperfect maps reveal something profound. Human beings are trying to transform mystery into knowledge. They are attempting to capture entire landscapes on surfaces small enough to carry in their hands. It is one of the most ambitious intellectual projects ever undertaken. A traveller can only see what stands before him. A map attempts to see everything at once. As civilizations grow, maps become more sophisticated. In ancient Mesopotamia, scribes record rivers and settlements. In Egypt, officials document land boundaries after floods reshape the Nile Valley. Greek thinkers begin asking deeper questions about the size and shape of the world itself. Roman administrators create networks of roads connecting vast territories. Knowledge accumulates slowly. Generation after generation adds another piece. Sometimes discoveries are lost. Sometimes they survive. Sometimes information travels astonishing distances, passing through cultures separated by language, religion, and geography. The evidence remains incomplete, but what survives in the historical record suggests that ancient people often understood far more about the world than modern audiences assume. They are not ignorant observers trapped within tiny horizons. Many are skilled navigators. Many are experienced surveyors. Many spend entire lifetimes gathering information about coastlines, rivers, mountains, and trade routes. The world of antiquity is more connected than it first appears. Goods travel enormous distances. Ideas travel even farther. A merchant carrying spices may also carry stories of distant ports. A sailor arriving from another sea may bring descriptions of unfamiliar coastlines. A diplomat crossing empires may return with geographic knowledge gathered from foreign courts. Little by little, pieces of the world are assembled. No single person possesses all the information. No single map contains everything. But collectively, civilizations create something remarkable. A growing picture of the planet. The process is never straightforward. Wars destroy archives. Fires consume libraries. Kingdoms collapse. Languages disappear. Documents decay. Again and again, knowledge vanishes. Yet fragments endure. Sometimes a single surviving copy becomes the last witness to an entire lost tradition. That possibility hangs over the mysterious map that will eventually capture global attention. When modern researchers first encounter it, they are not simply studying one document. They may be looking at the distant echo of many documents. They may be seeing traces of information copied and recopied across centuries, or perhaps they are witnessing something else entirely. At the beginning, nobody knows. The surviving fragment dates to the early 16th century, a time when the known world is expanding rapidly. European voyages are transforming geography. New coastlines are appearing on maps. Oceans once feared as barriers are becoming highways linking continents. It is an age of exploration, an age of ambition, an age when cartographers struggle to keep pace with discovery. Yet the fragment seems to contain knowledge that does not fit neatly into the accepted story. That realization arrives gradually. The first observers do not immediately conclude that history must be rewritten. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Scholars are trained to be cautious. Still, questions begin to accumulate. Why do certain features appear unexpectedly precise? Where did the mapmaker obtain his information? What sources did he use? How many earlier maps contributed to the final product? And perhaps most importantly, how many of those sources no longer exist? The mystery grows because maps are unlike most historical artifacts. A sword tells us about warfare. A coin tells us about trade. A building tells us about architecture. A map tells us about knowledge itself. It reveals what people believe they know about the world. It captures information gathered across vast distances and long spans of time. Every coastline on a map represents observation. Every location reflects communication. Every detail implies a chain of human connections stretching across landscapes and generations. That is why unusual maps attract so much attention. They do not merely show places. They reveal minds. They reveal networks. They reveal the movement of information. And occasionally they reveal gaps in our understanding of history. The ancient fragment appears small enough to fit comfortably on a table. Yet the questions surrounding it soon spread across entire academic disciplines. Historians become interested. Geographers become interested. Archaeologists become interested. Cartographers become interested. Even people far outside academia become fascinated. Some see evidence of forgotten exploration. Others see proof of lost knowledge. A few imagine vanished civilizations possessing abilities beyond anything accepted by conventional history. Most of those dramatic conclusions remain unsupported by evidence. Scholars still debate many aspects of the map, but speculation often expands faster than facts. That tension becomes part of the story. The document sits at a crossroads between genuine mystery and human imagination. It contains enough unusual details to provoke curiosity. It contains enough uncertainty to encourage endless interpretation. And so a single piece of preserved parchment begins a journey through modern history almost as remarkable as the journey that created it. Researchers examine every line, every note, every coastline, every possible source. Some discoveries strengthen the mystery, others weaken it. Some explanations appear convincing at first and later collapse under scrutiny. Others emerge slowly through years of careful analysis. Yet throughout all of these debates, one fact remains unchanged. The map forces people to look again, to reconsider assumptions, to ask whether fragments of forgotten knowledge might still survive in unexpected places. Because history is rarely a complete record, it is more like a landscape seen through fog. Certain features stand clearly in view, others remain hidden. Entire regions disappear into uncertainty. Occasionally the fog shifts. A forgotten document emerges. A buried city is uncovered. A lost shipwreck appears beneath the sea. Or an old map unfolds on a table and quietly challenges everything people thought they knew about the past. The fragment at the center of this story will do exactly that, not because it provides all the answers, but because it reveals how many questions remain. The power of the map does not come from what it proves. It comes from what people believe should have been impossible. Long before the mysterious fragment emerges from obscurity, historians think they understand the broad story of how humanity gradually learns the shape of the world. The details remain complex, but the overall narrative appears familiar. Civilizations expand their horizons. Sailors venture farther from shore. Explorers connect previously isolated regions, and mapmakers slowly assemble an increasingly accurate picture of the planet. Like most historical narratives, it feels orderly when viewed from a distance. Reality is rarely so neat. Centuries before satellites photograph Earth from space, every map is an attempt to describe a world that no single person has ever seen in its entirety. Information arrives unevenly. Some regions are surveyed repeatedly while others remain almost unknown. Certain coastlines become familiar through trade and navigation, while vast interiors linger in uncertainty. Knowledge accumulates in fragments. As a result, ancient and medieval maps often appear strange to modern eyes. Some distort distances dramatically. Some place mythical creatures in unexplored regions. Some combine reliable observations with legends, rumors, and misunderstandings. Many center the world around a particular culture's view of itself. This does not mean their creators are foolish. Quite the opposite. Most mapmakers work with the best information available to them. The challenge is that information itself is incomplete. Imagine trying to reconstruct an entire continent using reports from merchants, sailors, soldiers, pilgrims, and travelers who have each seen only a small piece of it. Some observations are accurate, others contain errors. Distances are estimated imperfectly, directions become confused, place names change from one language to another. A map becomes a puzzle assembled from thousands of disconnected pieces. Sometimes the result is remarkably successful, sometimes it is not. One of the most influential examples emerges in the ancient Mediterranean world. Greek scholars begin asking questions that seem surprisingly modern. They measure shadows, they calculate distances, they debate the size of Earth itself. Some reach conclusions astonishingly close to reality. Among the most remarkable achievements is the realization that Earth is spherical. Today this seems obvious. In antiquity it is a profound intellectual breakthrough. The evidence comes from many observations. Ships disappear hull first beyond the horizon. Different stars become visible at different latitudes. Lunar eclipses reveal Earth's curved shadow. From these clues, thinkers begin constructing a larger vision of the world. Yet understanding that Earth is round does not automatically reveal what lies across its oceans. Large portions of the planet remain unknown. Maps continue to contain blank spaces. Those blank spaces are important. Modern audiences sometimes forget how much uncertainty once existed. Vast regions that are now precisely mapped once occupied a strange territory between knowledge and imagination. Cartographers fill gaps with speculation because complete information simply does not exist. In some cases, enormous landmasses are misplaced. In others, entire continents are missing. Oceans may be too small, too large, or incorrectly connected. Rivers flow in impossible directions. Mountain ranges appear where none exist. The cumulative effect is a world that looks familiar yet fundamentally different from the one recognized today. By the late medieval period, however, change accelerates. Trade networks expand across Eurasia and Africa. Maritime technology improves. Navigators gather more reliable information. Port-o-land charts begin appearing around the Mediterranean. These practical navigation maps focus on coastlines, harbours, and sailing routes rather than philosophical ideas about the shape of the world. Accuracy becomes increasingly valuable. A merchant ship cares less about symbolic meaning than about reaching its destination. As more voyages occur, more information enters circulation. Still, significant mysteries remain. The Atlantic Ocean represents one of the greatest. For centuries, people know surprisingly little about what lies beyond its horizon. Ancient writers speculate, sailors tell stories, islands appear and disappear on maps. Rumors circulate about distant lands. Some stories prove false, others contain fragments of truth. Then comes a transformation that changes everything. European exploration across the Atlantic introduces entirely new geographic realities into the existing picture of the world. Coastlines unknown to most Old World mapmakers suddenly demand attention. Cartographers rush to incorporate new discoveries into their work. The challenge is enormous. Information arrives faster than it can be verified. Reports conflict with one another. Explorers exaggerate. Distances remain uncertain. Maps become works in progress. It is within this environment that the mysterious fragment will eventually emerge. Yet before its discovery, historians largely assume that the broad trajectory of geographic knowledge is understood. Ancient peoples know certain regions. Medieval societies preserve and expand portions of that knowledge. Early modern exploration dramatically enlarges the known world. The sequence seems straightforward. Then researchers begin studying the unusual map. Suddenly details that appear routine become difficult to explain. Certain coastlines seem more sophisticated than expected. Certain geographic relationships appear unexpectedly precise. Certain annotations imply access to sources that no longer survive. The questions become especially intriguing because scholars know that countless ancient documents have vanished. The destruction of a library's archives and collections is one of the recurring tragedies of history. In some cases, entire intellectual traditions disappear. The famous Library of Alexandria becomes a symbol of this broader phenomenon, though its decline occurs over centuries rather than in a single dramatic catastrophe. Across the ancient and medieval worlds, wars, fires, neglect, and simple decay destroy enormous quantities of written material. What survives is only a fraction of what once existed. This reality changes how historians view unusual discoveries. A surprising piece of information is not automatically impossible merely because it appears unexpected. The surviving record is incomplete. Entire chapters of human knowledge may be missing. At the same time, caution remains essential. A mystery does not automatically indicate lost civilizations or forgotten superpowers. Human beings have a tendency to fill gaps in understanding with dramatic explanations. Scholars therefore walk a careful path. They must remain open to evidence while resisting the temptation to leap beyond it. The ancient map becomes a perfect example of this challenge. On one side stand those who view it as evidence of extraordinary forgotten knowledge. On the other stand those who see nothing mysterious at all. Most researchers occupy a position somewhere between these extremes. They acknowledge genuine puzzles while searching for explanations grounded in historical evidence. As analysis continues, another realization emerges. The map is not important solely because of what it depicts. It is important because of what it reveals about the movement of information. Knowledge rarely remains confined to one place. Ideas travel. Charts are copied. Reports circulate. Documents pass through many hands. A map created in one century may preserve details inherited from another. Information gathered by sailors speaking one language may eventually appear in records written in a completely different one. The chain can stretch across continents and generations. By the time a surviving document reaches modern historians, it may represent layers upon layers of accumulated knowledge. The original observations might be centuries older than the final artifact itself. That possibility becomes increasingly significant. If the mysterious map incorporates earlier sources, then understanding it requires looking far beyond the date written upon it. Researchers must investigate vanished documents, forgotten voyages and networks of communication extending deep into the past. The search becomes larger than a single object. It becomes an investigation into how civilizations remember and how they forget, because history often resembles an enormous mosaic from which most pieces have been lost. The surviving fragments create an image but not a complete one. Occasionally a newly discovered piece changes the picture in unexpected ways. The ancient map appears capable of doing exactly that, not by overturning everything historians know, but by exposing how much of the story remains hidden beneath centuries of disappearance, destruction, and uncertainty. And somewhere within those missing centuries waits the man whose name becomes inseparable from the mystery itself. The man at the center of the mystery never expects to become one. When modern audiences hear his name, they often imagine an explorer standing at the edge of an unknown ocean, charting lands no one has ever seen before. The reality is more complicated and in many ways more interesting. He is not remembered because he discovers a continent. He's remembered because he leaves behind a document that seems to preserve traces of knowledge gathered across centuries. His name is Piri Reis. Born around the second half of the 15th century, he lives during one of the most dynamic periods in maritime history. The world around him is changing rapidly. Empires rise and expand. Trade routes connect distant regions. Sailors push farther into unfamiliar waters. New discoveries flow into ports, courts, and archives. For someone fascinated by geography, it is an extraordinary age to be alive. The Ottoman world into which Piri Reis is born sits at the crossroads of continents. Goods move between Europe, Asia, and Africa. Information travels alongside them. Merchants, diplomats, sailors, and travelers carry stories of distant lands. Every major port becomes a gathering place for knowledge. The Ottoman Empire itself is becoming a major maritime power. Fleets patrol strategic waters. Naval commanders require accurate charts. Pilots collect practical information about coastlines, harbours, currents, and hazards. Maps are not merely intellectual curiosities. They are tools of survival. A captain entering an unfamiliar harbour depends upon reliable geographic knowledge. An error on a chart can wreck a ship. A missing reef can destroy an expedition. A mistaken coastline can alter the fate of entire fleets. This practical world shapes Piri Reis from an early age. He spends much of his life connected to the sea. Historical records indicate that he sails extensively and gains first-hand experience navigating complex waters. He serves alongside his famous uncle Kemal Reis, one of the Ottoman Empire's most respected naval commanders. These years matter enormously. They expose him to a vast network of maritime knowledge. Every voyage produces information. Every port offers new reports. Every captured document potentially contains valuable geographic details. One of the lesser-known realities of the age is that maps frequently change hands through conflict. Naval warfare is not simply a struggle for territory. It is also a struggle for information. Ships carry charts. Captains possess navigational records. Maritime powers guard geographic knowledge carefully, but documents are often captured, copied, exchanged, or stolen. As a result, information circulates in unexpected ways. Knowledge gathered by one civilization may eventually appear in another. A chart created in one language may survive only through translation into a different language. The evidence remains incomplete, but what survives in historical records suggests that maritime archives often contain materials originating from many sources. Piri Reis understands the value of such information. He is not merely a sailor, he is also a collector. Throughout his career, he gathers charts, observations, and geographic records. He studies earlier works and compares them with contemporary knowledge. He appears deeply interested in understanding how different pieces of information fit together. This habit eventually leads to the creation of the document that will make him famous centuries later. In the year 1513, Piri Reis produces a world map. Or more precisely, he produces a map of which only a fragment survives. That surviving fragment becomes one of the most analysed documents in the history of cartography. At the time, however, it is simply one contribution among many to the growing effort to understand a rapidly expanding world. The surviving portion shows parts of Europe, Africa, and the Atlantic. Most notably, it includes sections of the newly encountered Americas. What immediately attracts scholarly attention is not merely what appears on the map, but what Piri Reis writes about it. Unlike many cartographers, he leaves notes. These annotations provide valuable insight into his methods. Rather than claiming to possess secret knowledge, he openly describes the sources he uses. According to his own statements, the map is compiled from multiple earlier charts and documents. Some are contemporary, others are much older. He mentions maps associated with Portuguese navigators. He refers to Arabic sources. He indicates that certain materials trace back to ancient traditions. This admission changes everything. The map is not presented as a wholly original creation. It is a synthesis, a compilation, a mosaic assembled from many pieces. That distinction becomes crucial. When later generations encounter unusual features on the map, they naturally ask where those features originate. If Piri Reis is copying earlier sources, then some mysteries may be older than the map itself. Researchers begin examining his annotations with extraordinary care. Each note becomes a clue. Each reference becomes a possible lead. Each source mentioned raises new questions. Unfortunately, many of the original documents he consults no longer exist. This creates one of the central frustrations surrounding the mystery. Historians know that Piri Reis draws upon earlier materials, but they cannot always examine those materials directly. The chain of evidence is incomplete. A chart copied from another chart may preserve information from an even older chart. The original source may have vanished centuries ago. As a result, scholars are often forced to reconstruct the past indirectly. They compare surviving maps. They analyze geographic details. They study patterns of transmission. They search for clues hidden within the document itself. The process resembles archaeology. Instead of excavating buried cities, researchers excavate layers of information. What they uncover reveals something remarkable about the world of the early 16th century. Knowledge is flowing across cultural boundaries far more extensively than many people assume. European explorers are sharing information sometimes intentionally and sometimes not. Islamic scholars preserve and transmit geographic traditions. Mediterranean sailors exchange practical navigation techniques. Documents move through trade, diplomacy, warfare, and commerce. The map becomes evidence of a deeply interconnected world. This alone makes it historically important. Yet another factor contributes to its enduring fascination. Piri Reis develops a reputation for competence. He's not an obscure amateur drawing imaginary lands. He is an experienced naval officer working within a sophisticated maritime environment. His career demonstrates practical expertise. His writings reveal careful attention to geographic information. This credibility matters. If unusual details appear on the map, they cannot be dismissed simply as the fantasies of an uninformed observer. At the same time, credibility does not guarantee perfection. Like every cartographer of his era, Piri Reis works with incomplete information. Errors inevitably occur. Distortions appear. Different sources sometimes conflict. The challenge for modern researchers is determining which features reflect genuine knowledge and which reflect the limitations of available data, that challenge becomes even more complicated because only a portion of the original map survives. The missing sections leave gaps. What additional information once existed? What coastlines appeared elsewhere? What annotations have been lost? No one knows. The surviving fragment is both a gift and a frustration. It provides enough information to generate intense interest. It withholds enough information to ensure enduring uncertainty. For centuries, the map itself remains largely forgotten. It does not immediately transform historical understanding. It sits quietly among countless other documents preserved within Ottoman archives. Then, in the 20th century, it is rediscovered. Suddenly, a document created more than 400 years earlier enters an entirely different world. A world of modern geography. A world of aerial photography. A world increasingly capable of comparing ancient maps with unprecedented precision. The fragment that once served practical maritime purposes now becomes the subject of global scrutiny. Historians examine it. Cartographers measure it. Writers speculate about it. Mystery begins to surround it. And as attention grows, one particular feature starts attracting more interest than anything else. Certain coastlines seem almost too good. Too detailed, too accurate, too difficult to explain. Whether that impression reflects reality or misunderstanding remains uncertain, but it is enough to launch one of the most famous cartographic debates in modern history. The coastlines themselves are about to become the real stars of the story. At first, the coastlines do not appear extraordinary. Spread across the surviving fragment are familiar shapes. Portions of Western Europe, the bulge of Africa islands scattered through the Atlantic, and the outlines of lands that European navigators are only beginning to understand. To modern eyes, accustomed to satellite imagery and digital maps, the drawing is obviously imperfect. Coastlines bend strangely. Distances are distorted. Some regions appear compressed while others seem stretched. Yet the mystery does not emerge from perfection. It emerges from comparison. The more closely researchers compare certain features with what should have been known in 1513, the more intriguing the map becomes. The age in which Piri Reis works is one of extraordinary geographic uncertainty. European sailors have reached parts of the Americas, but knowledge remains fragmented. Voyages are still relatively recent. Accurate surveys do not yet exist for vast stretches of coastline. Information travels slowly. Different maps often contradict one another. This makes any unexpectedly detailed representation immediately noteworthy. Some scholars studying the fragment noticed that portions of the South American coastline appear surprisingly recognizable. Certain bends and contours seem closer to reality than many would expect from the period. While not perfectly accurate, they appear informed by substantial geographic knowledge. The observation is important because maps do not create information from nothing. Every coastline represents accumulated experience. Someone must have seen the land. Someone must have recorded observations. Someone must have transmitted those observations to others. Even an imperfect map reflects a chain of human encounters with the physical world. The question becomes simple but profound. How long is that chain? The annotations left by Piri Reis offer a possible answer. He openly acknowledges drawing from multiple earlier sources. Some are contemporary charts. Others he claims originate from much older traditions. If that statement is accurate, then portions of the geographic information may have passed through many generations before reaching his hands. The map suddenly begins to resemble a historical archive disguised as a chart. Each coastline may preserve traces of earlier observations. Each feature may represent information inherited from lost documents. Researchers start asking where these older sources originate. The answer is not always clear. The Mediterranean world possesses a long tradition of cartography. Greek, Roman, Byzantine, Arab, and later European mapmakers all contribute to a growing body of geographic knowledge. Documents are copied, translated, modified, and recombined. A chart created in one century may influence another several hundred years later. This process can produce surprising results. Information sometimes survives long after its original context disappears. A coastline recorded by one generation may be preserved through repeated copying even after the original survey has been lost. Names change, empires collapse, languages vanish. Yet fragments of geographic knowledge continue travelling forward through time. The evidence remains incomplete, but historians know this phenomenon occurs repeatedly throughout history. Ancient astronomical observations survive in medieval manuscripts. Classical texts endure through translations. Engineering knowledge passes between civilizations. Maps are no different. The mysterious fragment appears to embody this process. But then another complication emerges. Not everyone agrees about what the map actually shows. This disagreement becomes one of the defining features of the debate. When people examine ancient maps, they often bring modern expectations with them. Human beings are remarkably skilled at recognizing patterns. Sometimes they recognize genuine patterns. Sometimes they see connections that are not really there. A vaguely curved coastline can begin resembling a modern shoreline. An uncertain feature can appear meaningful once someone proposes an interpretation. The mind naturally seeks familiarity. Cartographic analysis therefore requires caution. A resemblance alone is not enough. Researchers must ask whether the similarity is statistically meaningful or merely coincidental. This challenge becomes particularly important when examining the southern portions of the map. Some observers argue that certain landforms suggest geographic knowledge far beyond what should have been available in the early 16th century. Others strongly disagree, arguing that the same features can be explained through known historical sources and ordinary mapping errors. The debate grows increasingly intense. Yet before reaching its most controversial stage, the map reveals something else that is genuinely remarkable. It highlights how rapidly geographic knowledge is changing during the age of exploration. Modern people often imagine discovery as a series of isolated moments. A ship reaches a new coast. A flag is planted. A location appears on a map. Reality is much messier. Exploration produces streams of information that are often incomplete, contradictory, and constantly revised. Cartographers must work with reports arriving from different voyages, different crews, and different regions. Some observations are accurate, others contain mistakes. Distances are misjudged. Latitudes may be measured more successfully than longitudes. Creating a coherent map from such material is extraordinarily difficult. Piri Reis appears surprisingly aware of this challenge. His annotations indicate that he compares multiple sources rather than relying upon a single authority. In effect, he behaves like a researcher, attempting to reconcile conflicting evidence. This approach helps explain why the map attracts modern respect even among scholars who reject more sensational interpretations. The document reflects genuine cartographic effort. It is not a fantasy. It is not a hoax. It is an attempt to synthesize available knowledge into a usable representation of the world. That alone makes it historically valuable. Yet the mystery continues because certain details remain difficult to place within a simple narrative. Researchers begin examining individual coastlines with increasing precision. Measurements are taken. Projections are studied. Comparisons are performed. Some analysts argue that the map incorporates surprisingly sophisticated geographic information. Others counter that apparent accuracy often disappears when examined more rigorously. Both sides present evidence. Both sides identify strengths and weaknesses. No single explanation fully accounts for every aspect of the debate. This uncertainty helps keep interest alive. Unlike many historical controversies, the map resists easy resolution. If it were obviously fraudulent, the discussion would end. If it perfectly matched modern geography, the implications would be revolutionary. Instead, it occupies an ambiguous middle ground, accurate enough to inspire fascination, imperfect enough to permit disagreement. Meanwhile, another realization begins to emerge. The coastlines themselves may not be the most important feature. The real mystery may lie in the existence of the source materials that informed them. Even if every unusual feature eventually receives a conventional explanation, the map still points towards something significant, a network of geographic knowledge far more interconnected than many people imagine. Sailors cross seas, merchants exchange information, empires collect charts, cartographers borrow from one another, knowledge accumulates across cultural boundaries. The surviving fragment becomes evidence of this hidden world of information exchange. And hidden is exactly the right word, because most of the documents that contributed to that world have vanished. They survive only indirectly, as echoes, as references, as clues embedded within later works. The map becomes one of the few surviving windows into that lost landscape of knowledge. Every annotation gains importance. Every unusual feature becomes a possible trace of something older. Researchers begin looking beyond the visible coastlines toward the invisible history behind them. Who created the earlier charts? What voyages supplied the information? How much of that knowledge has disappeared? Could fragments of ancient geographic traditions still be preserved within the map? These questions push the investigation deeper. The mystery is no longer confined to the shape of continents. It now extends into the vanished archives of the past itself. And somewhere within those lost archives may lie the forgotten sources that Peary Rice claimed to have used when assembling one of history's most enigmatic maps. Once the coastlines begin attracting attention, researchers inevitably turn toward the notes. The lines of ink-tracing continents are fascinating, but the annotations scattered across the map may be even more important. They offer something rare in historical cartography, a glimpse into the mapmaker's own explanation of how the document was created. For historians, this is invaluable. Ancient maps often survive without context. A chart appears in an archive, a library, or an archaeological site, and scholars are left trying to reconstruct its origins from indirect clues. With the Peary Rice map, at least part of that process becomes easier, because the creator leaves behind comments describing his methods. The notes do not solve the mystery. They deepen it. Peary Rice presents himself not as a lone genius producing revolutionary discoveries from personal exploration, but as a compiler. He openly states that he draws upon many sources. The map in his description is assembled from a collection of earlier charts and geographic traditions. That admission immediately shifts the focus of investigation. Instead of asking only what Peary Rice knew, scholars begin asking what his sources knew. The distinction matters enormously. Imagine discovering a manuscript copied in the year 1500 from a document written in the year 500. The surviving manuscript belongs to the later period, but some of the information it contains may be far older. Historians must therefore separate the date of the surviving object from the age of the knowledge preserved within it. The same principle applies here. The map dates to 1513. The information on the map may not. Researchers scrutinize every surviving annotation in search of clues. Some references point toward relatively recent material. Portuguese navigators, for example, are actively exploring Atlantic waters during this era. Their charts contain valuable information about newly encountered coastlines. It would be entirely reasonable for Peary Rice to incorporate such sources. Other references appear more intriguing. He mentions older maps. He refers to materials associated with ancient traditions. He suggests that some information passes through multiple generations before reaching him. Unfortunately, this is where certainty begins to fade. Most of the documents he describes have not survived. Historians know they once existed because he says they did. Yet the originals are largely gone. This creates a peculiar situation. Researchers are studying a map that openly identifies its sources while simultaneously lacking access to many of those sources. The result resembles trying to reconstruct an ancient library from a handful of surviving catalogue entries. One can see the outlines of what existed. The contents remain frustratingly incomplete. The challenge becomes even more complicated because cartography is rarely a simple process of copying. When a mapmaker uses multiple sources, decisions must be made. Different charts may disagree. Coastlines may not align. Place names may conflict. Distances may vary. The cartographer becomes an editor as much as a compiler. Information is selected, modified, and combined. In effect, every map represents a conversation between different bodies of knowledge. The surviving fragment appears to preserve traces of many such conversations. Researchers begin searching for parallels between the map and other known documents. They compare geographic features, stylistic elements, and methods of representation. Occasionally, similarities emerge. Some portions resemble traditions found in Mediterranean cartography. Others appear influenced by Atlantic exploration. Still others seem connected to geographic ideas that have circulated for centuries. The picture becomes increasingly complex. Rather than pointing toward a single lost source, the evidence suggests a web of influences. This conclusion may sound less dramatic than stories of secret civilizations or forgotten superscience, but it is historically more interesting. Human knowledge rarely develops in isolation. Civilizations constantly borrow from one another. The ancient world is filled with examples. Mathematical concepts travel across regions. Astronomical observations move between cultures. Religious ideas spread along trade routes. Technological innovations appear in one place and later emerge somewhere else. Maps participate in the same process. A chart created in one port may influence sailors thousands of kilometers away. A navigational technique developed in one tradition may eventually appear in another. Information moves through networks that often remain invisible until fragments of evidence survive. The Piri-Reis map offers a rare glimpse into those networks. It reminds historians that geographic knowledge is cumulative. No single civilization discovers everything. No single culture possesses a monopoly on understanding the world. Instead, information accumulates through centuries of observation exchange and adaptation. The map appears to embody that accumulation. At the same time, researchers encounter another problem. How reliable are the annotations themselves? This question requires careful consideration. There is no strong reason to assume that Piri-Reis intentionally misrepresents his methods. Yet historical documents must always be approached critically. Writers sometimes exaggerate the significance of their sources. They may misunderstand older materials. They may repeat claims inherited from previous generations. The evidence remains incomplete. Some statements can be verified. Others cannot. As a result, scholars balance trust with caution. The annotations are treated as valuable evidence, but not infallible evidence. This approach gradually produces a more nuanced understanding. The map is neither a miraculous artifact that rewrites all of history, nor an ordinary document devoid of significance. It occupies a middle ground. Its importance lies in what it reveals about the circulation of knowledge during a transformative period in world history. That realization leads researchers toward an even larger question. If so many earlier charts once existed, where did they come from? The answer cannot be found entirely within the Ottoman world, nor can it be found solely in Europe. The search expands outward, across the Mediterranean, across the Atlantic, across centuries. Cartographers begin tracing possible lineages of information. They investigate Greek geographic traditions. They examine Roman sources. They study Islamic scholarship. They analyze medieval navigation charts. They compare Renaissance maps produced in different regions. A remarkable pattern emerges. The history of cartography is far more interconnected than many people realize. Knowledge repeatedly survives through unexpected pathways. When political systems collapse, information sometimes persists in distant regions. When languages disappear, translations preserve fragments of older texts. When original documents are lost, copies occasionally endure. The survival of knowledge often depends upon chance. A manuscript escapes a fire. A chart remains forgotten in an archive. A copy survives because someone decides it is worth preserving. History is filled with such accidents. Without them, enormous portions of the human past would be invisible. The Piri Reis map itself is one of these accidents. Had it been discarded, damaged, or destroyed, the entire modern debate surrounding it would never exist. No one would know the questions it raises. No one would examine its coastlines. No one would search for its lost sources. Its survival transforms it into a messenger from a vanished world of documents. A world in which sailors exchange charts in crowded ports. A world in which cartographers compare reports from distant seas. A world in which geographic information flows across boundaries of empire, language, and religion. Most of that world has disappeared. The archives are gone. The original charts are gone. The people who created them are gone. Yet traces remain. The map preserves some of those traces like fossils embedded in stone. Each annotation becomes evidence of an older layer. Each reference hints at documents no longer available for inspection. The investigation, therefore, begins moving beyond the map itself. Researchers are no longer simply studying what survives. They are attempting to reconstruct what has been lost, and the deeper they search into those missing layers of history, the more they encounter a tantalizing possibility. Some of the most important sources behind the map may have vanished so completely that only their echoes remain. The deeper researchers look into the origins of the map, the more they find themselves chasing ghosts. Not supernatural ghosts, but documentary ones. Lost charts, missing manuscripts, vanished records. Entire bodies of knowledge that once existed influenced later generations, and then disappeared almost completely from the historical record. This is one of the great paradoxes of history. Modern people often imagine the past as fixed and permanent. A civilization rises, leaves evidence behind, and waits to be studied. In reality, most of what human beings create is lost. Buildings collapse, texts decay, archives burn, languages die. The surviving record is only a fraction of what once existed. The map created by Piri Reis seems to offer a brief glimpse into that missing world. Its annotations suggest that the document is built upon layers of older material. Some sources may have been relatively recent. Others may have reached back centuries. The challenge is determining how far. The search begins with a simple observation. Cartographers almost never start from nothing. Every generation inherits information from those who came before. A mapmaker may add new discoveries, correct old errors, or reorganize existing knowledge, but the foundation is usually inherited. This principle applies across history. Ancient Greek geographers build upon earlier traditions from Egypt and the Near East. Roman administrators adopt and expand geographic knowledge gathered from across their empire. Medieval scholars preserve fragments of classical learning while adding information from their own observations and travels. Knowledge accumulates. Knowledge transforms. Knowledge survives, at least sometimes. The problem is that survival is uneven. A single famous text may endure through dozens of copies while hundreds of other works vanish without trace. In cartography, this problem is particularly severe. Maps are working tools. They are folded, carried exposed to weather, and frequently replaced with updated versions. Unlike monumental inscriptions carved into stone, many charts live hard lives. Once they become obsolete, they may be discarded. As a result, the number of surviving ancient maps is surprisingly small compared to the number that must once have existed. Historians know this because later writers frequently mention documents that no longer survive. Descriptions appear in texts. References occur in annotations. Copies hint at earlier originals. The shadows of lost maps linger throughout the historical record. The Piri Reis map becomes intriguing partly because it points towards some of those shadows. Its creator specifically mentions older source materials. This immediately raises questions about what kinds of charts were circulating before 1513 and how much information they contained. One possible source of influence comes from the ancient Mediterranean world. Long before the age of exploration, Greek scholars are attempting to understand the geography of Earth. Some estimate the planet's circumference with surprising accuracy. Others compile descriptions of distant lands. Geographers gather reports from merchants, soldiers, and travellers. Among the most influential figures is Claudius Ptolemy, whose geographic writings shape cartography for centuries. Working in the 2nd century, Ptolemy assembles a system for representing locations using coordinates. His work survives through a complicated journey involving copies, translations, and rediscoveries. Though not perfectly accurate, it provides a framework that profoundly influences later map-making. Yet Ptolemy is only one piece of a much larger story. Many earlier works are lost. Many contemporary works are lost. Many local traditions leave behind little direct evidence. The historical record resembles a library from which most books have been removed. Researchers can still examine the shelves. The missing volumes remain a mystery. Another important source of geographic knowledge emerges through the Islamic world. During the medieval period, scholars working across a vast region stretching from Spain to Central Asia preserve, translate, and expand earlier learning. Geography becomes an active field of study. Travellers document distant lands. Astronomers improve measurements. Administrators collect information useful for governing large territories. Among the most remarkable figures is Muhammad al-Idrisi, who produces an influential geographic work in the 12th century. His maps and descriptions draw upon information gathered from multiple cultures and regions. They reflect a world connected by trade, travel, and intellectual exchange. While not modern in appearance, they demonstrate a sophisticated effort to understand global geography. The existence of such works reminds historians of an important fact. Knowledge does not move in a single direction. There is no simple chain running from ancient Greece to Renaissance Europe. Instead, information circulates through many societies. Ideas are translated, modified, preserved, rediscovered. The Piri race map emerges from this environment of continuous exchange. Its sources may therefore be more diverse than they first appear. Researchers begin imagining the possible journeys taken by geographic information before it reaches the Ottoman admiral's desk. A chart is created in one port, copied in another, translated into a different language, combined with new observations, passed to sailors, captured during a naval conflict, stored in an archive, copied again. Generations later, fragments of its information appear within a new map. Such scenarios are entirely plausible because history contains countless examples of knowledge travelling through similarly complex pathways. The challenge is proving specific connections. Evidence is often scarce. The original documents are gone. Only traces remain. As scholars investigate further, they encounter a recurring problem: the temptation to exaggerate. Whenever a historical mystery involves missing records, speculation flourishes. If the sources are lost, almost any theory can be proposed. Some writers begin imagining vast libraries of forgotten knowledge. Others envision ancient navigators possessing abilities far beyond anything supported by archaeological evidence. These ideas attract attention because they offer dramatic explanations. Unfortunately, dramatic explanations are not always correct. The evidence remains incomplete, but what survives generally suggests that ancient and medieval cartographers achieved their accomplishments through observation mathematics, navigation, and the gradual accumulation of information rather than through mysterious technologies or vanished super-civilizations. This conclusion does not diminish their achievements. If anything, it makes them more impressive. Creating useful maps without satellites, aerial surveys, or modern instruments requires extraordinary skill. Ancient navigators cross oceans. Medieval scholars compare geographic reports from distant regions. Cartographers synthesize vast quantities of imperfect information. Their accomplishments are real. No mythical explanation is necessary. Yet genuine mysteries still remain. Researchers continue finding hints that some source materials behind the Piri Reis map preserve knowledge now lost in its original form. Not impossible knowledge. not supernatural knowledge, simply knowledge whose documentary trail has disappeared. That distinction is crucial. The most fascinating historical mysteries often emerge not because something impossible occurred, but because ordinary processes leave incomplete evidence. The world behind the map may be one of those mysteries, a world of charts exchanged among sailors, a world of archives now vanished, a world of observations recorded by people whose names have been forgotten. The surviving fragment acts like a window looking into that lost landscape. Not a clear window, more like a cracked one. Enough can be seen to suggest what once existed, not enough to reconstruct it completely. And as researchers continue following those faint traces backward through time, they arrive at another compelling question. If older maps really contributed to the document who gathered the original information in the first place, the answer may lie not in libraries or archives, but on the decks of ships crossing seas that many people still considered unknown. Long before scholars debate mysterious coastlines and lost source materials, there are sailors. The map cannot exist without them. Every line drawn across parchment ultimately begins as a human encounter with the physical world. Someone sees a coastline, someone measures a distance, someone records a landmark, someone survives a voyage and carries information home. Without those countless individual observations, even the most sophisticated cartographer has nothing to work with. This reality often disappears behind the mystery. Maps seem abstract when viewed centuries later. They become collections of symbols, measurements, and theories. Yet every geographic detail originates in experience. A bay is discovered because a ship enters it. An island is mapped because sailors reach its shores. A current becomes known because generations of mariners learn how it behaves. The history of cartography is inseparable from the history of navigation. To understand the possible origins of the information preserved within the Piri Reis map, researchers must therefore consider the capabilities of the sailors who came before it. For much of modern history, ancient seafarers are underestimated. Popular imagination often portrays them hugging coastlines, fearful of open water, rarely venturing beyond familiar routes. The archaeological and historical evidence paints a more complex picture. Human beings have been crossing seas for thousands of years. Remarkably early migrations demonstrate this fact. Long before recorded history, people reach islands separated from mainlands by stretches of water. These journeys require boats, planning, and navigational skill. They're not accidental wanderings. Across the ancient world, maritime cultures emerge in many regions. The peoples of the Mediterranean become experienced sailors. Traders move goods between distant ports. Networks of exchange connect regions separated by hundreds and sometimes thousands of kilometers. Cargoes include metals, ceramics, textiles, food, and luxury goods. Information travels alongside everything else. The sea becomes a highway rather than a barrier. Among the most famous maritime civilizations are the Phoenicians. Operating across the Mediterranean, they established trading networks that extend far beyond their original homeland. Ancient writers attribute remarkable voyages to them. Some accounts are difficult to verify. Others remain debated. Yet there is little doubt that they possess extensive nautical expertise. The evidence suggests that ancient sailors are capable of far more ambitious journeys than many earlier historians assumed. This realization becomes important when evaluating claims about geographic knowledge. A coastline does not necessarily require a modern expedition to be known. Information can accumulate gradually through generations of maritime activity. One voyage contributes a detail. Another voyage adds a correction. A third records a harbour. Over centuries, a surprisingly accurate picture may emerge. This process rarely leaves a perfect documentary record. Sailors often transmit practical knowledge orally. Navigation techniques pass from captain to apprentice. Coastal landmarks become part of shared maritime memory. Much of this information never enters surviving written documents. Historians therefore face a challenge. The absence of evidence is not always evidence of absence. A coastline may have been familiar to navigators long before the surviving records clearly demonstrate it. At the same time, caution remains necessary. Possibility is not proof. The fact that sailors could have gathered information does not automatically mean they did. Researchers must distinguish between what is plausible and what is supported by evidence. The Atlantic Ocean provides an excellent example. For centuries it occupies a peculiar place in the imagination of Europe, North Africa, and the Mediterranean world. It is known, feared, travelled, and misunderstood all at once. Coastal waters are familiar. Open expanses remain uncertain. Yet people do venture into them. Fishermen follow productive waters. Merchants seek opportunities. Explorers search for routes and resources. Stories circulate about islands, currents, and distant lands. Some stories prove true, others do not. The cumulative result is a growing body of knowledge that often exceeds what survives in written records. One of the most fascinating developments in recent scholarship involves the recognition that ancient and medieval navigators frequently possess a sophisticated understanding of environmental patterns. They learn prevailing winds. They observe ocean currents. They recognize seasonal changes. They understand how birds, clouds, and waves can provide clues about nearby land. These skills emerge through experience rather than advanced technology. They allow mariners to operate successfully across large bodies of water. The achievements are impressive precisely because they are practical. A sailor does not need a theoretical understanding of global geography to navigate effectively. He needs reliable methods. Generation after generation refines those methods. By the time Piri Reis begins gathering source materials, maritime traditions stretching back centuries already exist throughout much of the known world. The Mediterranean is linked by dense networks of navigation. The Indian Ocean hosts extensive trade routes connecting Africa, Arabia, India, and Southeast Asia. Atlantic exploration is expanding rapidly. Knowledge from these different regions sometimes intersects. Charts circulate. Pilots exchange information. Ports become centers of geographic accumulation. This environment helps explain how a cartographer might gain access to surprisingly diverse sources. The map becomes less mysterious when viewed as the product of interconnected maritime networks. Yet another question emerges. Could some geographic information preserved on the map ultimately derive from voyages whose records no longer survive? The answer is almost certainly yes. Not necessarily extraordinary voyages, simply forgotten ones. History remembers only a small percentage of the journeys that actually occur. Thousands of ships cross seas without leaving detailed records. Most sailors disappear from history entirely. Their observations survive, if at all, through indirect transmission. A coastline drawn on a later map may represent the accumulated experience of countless anonymous mariners. This possibility fascinates researchers because it highlights how fragile historical memory can be. The individuals who gather information often vanish. The information itself may continue travelling through time. A harbour known to generations of sailors may eventually appear on a chart whose creator never visits it personally. Knowledge acquires a life of its own. The Piri Reis map appears to preserve some of these accumulated layers. Its geographic details seem less like the product of a single expedition, and more like the outcome of centuries of maritime observation. Exactly how many centuries remains uncertain. Scholars still debate the answer. What survives in the record suggests a mixture of recent discoveries and older traditions. Untangling those layers proves difficult. Some clues point toward Renaissance exploration. Others hint at inherited knowledge reaching further into the past. The challenge is separating them. Researchers continue comparing coastlines, annotations, and cartographic conventions in hopes of reconstructing the map's genealogy. As they do so, they encounter an increasingly intriguing pattern. Many features that initially appear mysterious can be explained through known navigation traditions and historical sources, but one feature refuses to disappear. Again and again, attention returns to the southern regions of the map. Some observers believe they see something extraordinary, not merely evidence of forgotten charts, not merely traces of lost voyages, something potentially far more controversial. A landmass that appears where it should not, a coastline that seems to challenge accepted history, a feature that will transform the map from an interesting historical artifact into one of the most debated documents ever discovered. The controversy surrounding Antarctica is about to begin. For decades, one word becomes almost inseparable from the mystery of the map: Antarctica. The claim appears astonishing when stated simply. According to some interpretations, the southern portion of the Piri Reis map seems to depict part of the Antarctic continent centuries before its official discovery by modern explorers. If true, the implications would be extraordinary. The continent remains unknown to the wider world until the 19th century. The first confirmed sightings of Antarctica generally date to the early 1800s. Before then, sailors operating in the Atlantic, Pacific and Indian Oceans possess no accepted knowledge of its coastline. Yet certain researchers begin arguing that the map contains exactly such knowledge. The idea spreads rapidly. Books are written. Documentaries discuss it. Popular writers present it as one of history's great unsolved mysteries. The claim eventually becomes one of the primary reasons the map achieves global fame. At first glance, it is easy to understand the appeal. When viewed in a particular way, the southern section of the map appears unusual. Some observers suggest that what most scholars identify as a distorted extension of South America might instead represent part of Antarctica. The argument becomes even more dramatic when additional claims are added. Some writers suggest that the coastline shown on the map resembles Antarctica beneath its modern ice cover. In this interpretation, the source materials behind the map would need to preserve knowledge from an unimaginably distant past. Suddenly, the discussion moves far beyond cartography. Theories begin multiplying. Lost civilizations are proposed. Forgotten ages of exploration are imagined. Ancient global cultures are invoked. In some versions of the story, mysterious seafarers map the world thousands of years before conventional history believes possible. The narrative is compelling. The evidence is another matter. As professional historians, geographers and cartographers examine the claims, serious problems begin to emerge. The first issue involves the map itself. Ancient and early modern maps are not modern geographic projections. Distortions occur constantly. Coastlines bend, distances stretch, land masses shift position. Comparing such maps directly with satellite imagery is far more difficult than it initially appears. A resemblance can sometimes be created simply by selecting particular features while ignoring others. Researchers therefore approach the question systematically. They analyze shapes. They compare proportions. They examine geographic context. They ask whether alternative explanations better fit the available evidence. In many cases, the answer is yes. A large number of specialists conclude that the controversial southern coastline is more likely a distorted representation of South America rather than Antarctica. This explanation requires far fewer assumptions. It fits the historical context of early 16th century exploration. It aligns with known cartographic practices, and it avoids the need to invoke knowledge that should not have existed. Yet the debate does not disappear. Part of the reason is that some aspects of the map genuinely remain difficult to interpret. The southern regions contain distortions and ambiguities that allow multiple readings. Ancient cartography often lacks the precision needed to settle every question conclusively. No single explanation fully accounts for every detail. This uncertainty creates space for competing interpretations. The evidence remains incomplete. Scholars continue examining the issue, though the majority view remains skeptical of Antarctic claims. Another important problem concerns the continent itself. Modern Antarctica is enormous. Its coastline is complex. Large portions are hidden beneath vast ice sheets. Claims that an ancient map depicts Antarctica beneath the ice require evidence far stronger than a vague resemblance between coastlines. When researchers compare the map with modern geological data, the proposed matches often prove less convincing than they initially appear. Certain similarities depend heavily on selective interpretation. Other features fail to correspond at all. The supposed accuracy becomes much harder to demonstrate under rigorous analysis. This does not mean the map lacks mystery. It means the mystery may be different from what popular accounts suggest. Historians increasingly view the real puzzle not as evidence of a lost ice-free Antarctica, but as evidence of how geographic information moves through time. The map remains fascinating even without extraordinary claims. In some ways, the ordinary explanation is more remarkable. Consider what the document actually represents. An Ottoman admiral in the early 16th century compiles information from multiple sources originating in different regions and periods. He incorporates knowledge gathered by sailors, merchants, navigators, and explorers. He creates a synthesis reflecting centuries of accumulated geographic experience. That achievement alone is impressive. It demonstrates the interconnected nature of the historical world. Knowledge crosses political boundaries. Information survives cultural transformations. Geographic traditions interact and evolve. The map becomes a witness to those processes. Yet popular fascination with Antarctica continues for another reason. The continent occupies a special place in human imagination. Unlike most regions of Earth, Antarctica remains genuinely remote. Even today it feels mysterious. Vast ice fields stretch beyond the horizon. Extreme conditions limit human activity. Entire landscapes remain largely untouched. People naturally associate such places with secrets. When a historical mystery appears connected to Antarctica, curiosity intensifies. The idea feels cinematic. A forgotten continent, ancient maps, lost knowledge, hidden history. The elements fit together almost perfectly. Unfortunately, historical truth does not always follow the most dramatic narrative. Researchers repeatedly discover that reality is both more complicated and more subtle. The Piri Reis map illustrates this pattern beautifully. The more closely it is examined, the more it resists simple conclusions. Some sensational claims weaken under scrutiny. Some conventional explanations prove stronger than expected. At the same time, genuine questions remain. Where exactly do certain geographic details originate? How much information derives from lost source materials? What observations are preserved within those missing documents? These mysteries survive regardless of what one believes about Antarctica. In fact, many historians argue that focusing exclusively on the Antarctic controversy obscures the map's real significance. The document is valuable because it reveals networks of knowledge exchange. It preserves evidence of cartographic traditions. It offers insight into how geographic information accumulates across generations. These contributions remain important whether or not any Antarctic interpretation is accepted. The controversy nevertheless leaves a lasting mark. It transforms the map from a specialized historical artifact into a global cultural phenomenon. Millions of people hear about it. Writers continue debating it. Researchers continue analyzing it. And the discussion gradually expands beyond Antarctica itself. If one controversial interpretation can attract so much attention, what about the rest of the map? What details are genuinely unusual? Which apparent mysteries result from misunderstanding? Where does solid evidence end and speculation begin? These questions push the investigation into a new phase. The focus shifts away from grand claims and toward careful analysis. Researchers begin separating fact from assumption, observation from interpretation, and evidence from imagination. The process proves both revealing and humbling, because some mysteries become stronger under scrutiny, others vanish entirely, and the map once again refuses to be either completely ordinary or completely extraordinary. By the time the Antarctica controversy reaches its peak, the map has acquired a reputation far larger than the document itself. To some people it becomes proof of forgotten civilizations. To others it becomes evidence that conventional history is fundamentally wrong. Still others dismiss the entire subject as a misunderstanding inflated by sensational storytelling. The reality lies somewhere between these extremes. As researchers continue examining the map in detail, they discover that its greatest lesson may not concern what it proves, but how historical mysteries are created. The process begins with something deceptively simple. Human beings are natural pattern seekers. The ability helps people survive. It allows them to recognize faces, interpret landscapes, identify threats, and understand complex environments. Yet the same ability sometimes leads people to see meaningful connections where none actually exist. Maps are particularly vulnerable to this phenomenon. A coastline on an old chart is rarely precise. Lines curve, proportions shift, entire regions become compressed or expanded. When modern observers compare such shapes to contemporary maps, similarities can appear surprisingly convincing. Sometimes they are genuine, sometimes they are accidental. Distinguishing between the two requires careful analysis. Cartographers therefore approach the Piri Reis map with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. They begin asking technical questions. What projection is being used? How accurate are the measurements? What distortions are expected for maps of this period? How do specific features compare with known source traditions? These questions may sound dry compared to stories about lost continents, but they are essential. Historical mysteries are solved through evidence, not excitement. One of the first discoveries to emerge from detailed study is that the map contains both impressive strengths and obvious weaknesses. This is precisely what one would expect from a serious early 16th century chart. Some coastal regions are represented surprisingly well. Others contain substantial errors. Certain islands appear in unusual positions. Distances sometimes fluctuate. The map is neither miraculously accurate nor hopelessly inaccurate. It occupies the complicated middle ground where most real historical documents exist. This conclusion may seem less dramatic than popular theories, but it reveals something important. The map behaves like an authentic working document. Its imperfections are often as informative as its successes. Errors can reveal sources. Distortions can reveal methods. Unexpected features can reveal the limitations under which the cartographer operates. Researchers begin tracing these clues. In some cases, unusual geographic details can be linked to known cartographic traditions. Medieval and Renaissance mapmakers frequently inherit information from earlier sources. Mistakes are copied alongside accurate observations. Once an error enters a widely used tradition, it may survive for generations. This phenomenon appears repeatedly throughout the history of mapping. A misplaced island can remain on charts for centuries. A mistaken coastline can become accepted wisdom. A rumor can gradually acquire the appearance of fact. The Piri Reis map contains traces of this process. Not every unusual feature represents hidden knowledge. Some represent inherited misunderstandings. This realization helps explain why the map seems simultaneously advanced and flawed. It is drawing from many layers of information. Some layers are highly reliable, others are less so. The resulting document reflects both. The evidence remains incomplete, but what survives suggests a complex mixture of observation, interpretation, copying, and revision. Exactly what historians would expect from a map assembled from numerous sources. Another revealing aspect emerges when researchers compare the map with other documents from the same era. Far from existing in complete isolation, many of its features fit within broader patterns of Renaissance cartography. Similar ideas appear elsewhere. Similar uncertainties appear elsewhere. Similar attempts to reconcile conflicting geographic information appear elsewhere. The map remains unusual. It does not remain unique in every respect. This distinction matters because extraordinary historical claims often depend upon treating a document as completely disconnected from its context. The more researchers understand the wider cartographic world, the more certain mysteries become easier to explain. Yet not all questions disappear. Some continue resisting easy answers. One persistent issue involves the exact origin of specific geographic details. Even when scholars can identify likely source traditions, tracing information back to its original observations often proves impossible. Too many documents are missing. Too many links in the chain have vanished. History leaves gaps. Those gaps become fertile ground for speculation. Popular writers sometimes fill them with elaborate narratives. Lost empires emerge. Ancient global explorers appear. Vast forgotten civilizations are imagined. Archaeologists approach these ideas cautiously. The reason is straightforward. Claims require evidence. If a civilization possessed advanced geographic knowledge on a global scale, one would expect supporting archaeological traces. Ships' ports, settlements, artifacts, records, or other forms of material evidence should survive. So far, such evidence remains absent. No known archaeological discovery supports the existence of a technologically advanced prehistoric civilization capable of mapping the world in the manner often proposed by fringe theories. This does not mean ancient peoples are incapable of remarkable achievements. Quite the opposite. Archaeology continues revealing sophisticated navigation engineering and cultural exchange throughout the ancient world. The real accomplishments of historical societies are often extraordinary enough without requiring unsupported additions. The Piri Reis map itself demonstrates this beautifully. Its existence reflects genuine intellectual achievement. A skilled cartographer gathers information from multiple traditions. He compares sources. He synthesizes knowledge collected across enormous distances. He produces a document that remains worthy of study more than 5 centuries later. That accomplishment needs no embellishment. Yet the tension between evidence and imagination continues shaping the map's reputation. Part of the reason is psychological. People are drawn to mysteries that seem to challenge accepted knowledge. The possibility that history contains hidden chapters is inherently appealing. It suggests that the world remains larger and stranger than it appears. Sometimes that intuition proves correct. Archaeologists discover lost cities. Ancient texts are deciphered. Forgotten cultures emerge from obscurity. History genuinely changes. The challenge is determining which mysteries point toward new discoveries and which reflect misunderstandings. The Piri Reis map sits precisely at that boundary. Some of the mysteries surrounding it have weakened under careful investigation. Others remain unresolved. The process of separating the two teaches historians something valuable about the nature of evidence itself. Every document contains multiple stories. There is the story it tells. There is the story of how it was created. And there is the story of how later generations interpret it. The Piri Reis map possesses all three. The chart itself tells a geographic story. Its construction reveals a story of knowledge transmission. Its modern reputation reveals a story about human fascination with the unknown. Together, these layers make it one of the most intriguing historical artifacts of its kind. Yet as researchers continue evaluating competing explanations, another possibility begins attracting attention. Perhaps the most interesting question is not whether the map preserves evidence of a lost civilization. Perhaps the more important question is why so many people believe it might. To answer that, historians must look beyond the map and toward one of humanity's oldest and most persistent dreams. The dream that somewhere beneath the surface of history an entire forgotten world is waiting to be found. The idea appears again and again throughout human history. A great civilization flourishes, achieves extraordinary knowledge, then disappears beneath the waves, beneath the sand, or beneath the weight of time itself. Only fragments remain. A ruined monument, a mysterious artifact, a legend preserved in ancient texts. A map that seems to contain information that should not exist. The dream is powerful because it speaks to something deeply human. Every generation understands that most lives are forgotten. Most buildings eventually collapse. Most records vanish. Entire cultures can disappear. If this happens repeatedly across history, it becomes tempting to imagine that something truly enormous may have been lost. The Piri Reis map eventually becomes attached to this idea, not because the document itself explicitly describes a vanished civilization, but because some observers begin viewing it as indirect evidence for one. The logic is simple. If certain geographic details seem difficult to explain through known historical processes, perhaps they originate from a forgotten culture possessing advanced knowledge. From there, the theories expand rapidly. Some writers point towards stories of lost lands preserved in myth. Others connect the map to ancient flood traditions. Still others invoke legendary civilizations that supposedly charted the globe long before recorded history. Among the most famous examples is the story of Atlantis. Few lost civilizations have exerted a stronger hold on the modern imagination. Originally appearing in the writings of Plato during the 4th century BCE, Atlantis is described as a powerful island society that ultimately meets a catastrophic end. Whether Plato intends the story as history allegory, political philosophy, or some combination of these remains debated. Most scholars conclude that Atlantis is not a historical civilization whose existence has been independently verified, yet the story refuses to disappear. Across centuries, countless writers attempt to locate Atlantis in different parts of the world. Proposed locations range from the Mediterranean to the Atlantic and beyond. Each new archaeological mystery becomes a potential candidate. The Piri Reis map eventually enters this tradition. Some enthusiasts suggest that the lost source materials behind the map might preserve knowledge inherited from an ancient maritime civilization. The proposal is intriguing. The evidence is limited. Archaeologists evaluate such claims by asking a fundamental question. Where is the supporting material record? Civilizations leave traces, cities leave ruins, trade leaves artifacts, agriculture leaves environmental signatures, writing leaves inscriptions and documents. Large-scale maritime societies leave port shipwrecks and evidence of exchange. If an advanced global civilization existed in deep antiquity, one would expect at least some portion of that evidence to survive. So far, no convincing archaeological record supports such a conclusion. The evidence remains incomplete, as it always does in archaeology, but current discoveries fit far more comfortably within established models of human development. This does not mean ancient societies are simple. Quite the opposite. One of the most surprising developments of modern archaeology is the growing recognition that prehistoric and ancient peoples often accomplish remarkable things. Massive monuments appear. Complex trade networks emerge. Sophisticated astronomical observations are recorded. Long-distance maritime travel occurs. The past continually proves more capable and inventive than earlier generations assume. The challenge is distinguishing genuine achievements from imagined ones. The Piri Reis map occupies an unusual position within this conversation, because it contains elements of both certainty and uncertainty. The document itself is real. Its historical context is real. Its annotations are real. Its compilation from multiple sources is well supported. What remains uncertain is the full history behind those sources. That uncertainty invites speculation. Researchers therefore examine alternative explanations. Perhaps the map reflects the gradual accumulation of geographic knowledge over centuries. Perhaps information from many cultures converges through trade and navigation networks. Perhaps observations recorded by countless anonymous sailors eventually reach cartographers who synthesize them into increasingly sophisticated representations of the world. This explanation lacks the dramatic appeal of a lost super-civilization. It possesses something else: evidence. The archaeological record consistently demonstrates the power of cumulative knowledge. Human beings do not need forgotten advanced civilizations to explain impressive achievements. Given enough generations, information naturally accumulates. Navigation improves. Maps improve. Measurement improves. Communication expands. The resulting knowledge can appear astonishing when viewed from a distance. Consider medieval cathedrals, Roman engineering, Polynesian navigation, or ancient astronomical calculations. Each reflects generations of accumulated expertise. None require mysterious origins. The same principle may apply to the map. Yet the fascination with lost civilizations continues because archaeology itself occasionally uncovers genuine surprises. Entire cities vanish from historical memory and later reappear through excavation. One striking example is Troy. For centuries, many people regard the city as largely legendary. Then archaeological work reveals that a real settlement exists beneath the site traditionally associated with the story. The discovery does not prove every legend true. It demonstrates something subtler. History can preserve distorted memories of real places. This lesson encourages caution in both directions. Skepticism is necessary, so is openness. Archaeologists must avoid dismissing unusual ideas simply because they seem surprising. At the same time, they must avoid accepting dramatic claims without sufficient evidence. The balance is difficult. The Piri Reis map repeatedly forces scholars into that balancing act. Every interpretation must be weighed carefully. Every claim must be tested. Every conclusion must remain proportionate to the available evidence. As the debate evolves, an interesting shift occurs. Researchers become increasingly interested not in hypothetical lost civilizations but in lost landscapes. This distinction is important. Entire civilizations may not have vanished beneath the sea, but many real coastlines certainly have. During the last ice age, global sea levels are dramatically lower than they are today. Vast stretches of land now submerged beneath oceans once stand exposed. Rivers flow across plains that no longer exist. Human populations occupy regions currently hidden beneath water. These drowned landscapes are not speculative. They are geological reality, and they open a fascinating possibility. Could some ancient geographic traditions preserve memories of coastlines that later disappear? Could fragments of knowledge survive long after the landscapes themselves are gone? The question leads the investigation in a new direction, away from mythical empires, away from legendary civilizations, towards something both more tangible and potentially more profound, the changing shape of Earth itself. Because long before maps are drawn, long before archives are built, and long before civilizations rise, coastlines are already moving. Seas advance, land disappears. Entire worlds sink beneath the water. And the echoes of those vanished worlds may survive in ways that few people expect. If a person could stand on the coastline of the world 20,000 years ago, much of the view would be unrecognizable. The oceans would still be there. The continents would still be there. Yet the boundaries between land and sea would be dramatically different. Entire regions that now lie beneath hundreds of feet of water would stand exposed to the air. Broad coastal plains would stretch toward distant horizons. River valleys would extend far beyond modern shorelines. Places that today exist only on sonar maps would once have supported plants, animals, and human communities. This is not speculation. It is one of the most thoroughly established realities of Earth's recent geological history. During the height of the last ice age, enormous quantities of water are locked within continental ice sheets. Because so much water is stored as ice, global sea levels fall dramatically. Coastlines migrate outward. Continents become larger. The world itself changes shape. When the climate later warms, the process reverses. Ice melts. Water returns to the oceans. Sea levels rise, slowly at first, then more rapidly during certain periods. Over thousands of years, coastlines retreat inland. The transformation is immense, and unlike the rise and fall of kingdoms, it affects nearly every inhabited region of the planet. The significance of this becomes increasingly apparent as underwater archaeology develops. For centuries, historians focus primarily on land because that is where evidence is easiest to find. Cities, temples, roads, and monuments survive above the surface. The sea conceals its secrets. Modern technology begins changing that. researchers start mapping submerged landscapes. Ancient river channels appear beneath coastal waters. Former shorelines emerge from geological surveys. Evidence accumulates showing that many areas occupied by prehistoric people are now underwater. The implications are profound. Human history did not unfold solely on the coastlines visible today. Much of it occurred on coastlines that no longer exist. One of the most striking examples lies beneath the waters of the North Sea. Today ships cross these waters between Britain and mainland Europe. Yet during portions of prehistory, a vast lowland plain connects these regions. Archaeologists refer to this lost landscape as Doggerland. For thousands of years people live there. They hunt, they fish, they travel across territory that eventually disappears beneath rising seas. The land is not destroyed in a single catastrophe. Instead, it vanishes gradually as coastlines migrate. Generation by generation, communities adapt. Some relocate, some change their ways of life. The world they know becomes smaller. Eventually, the sea claims the remaining land. Only traces survive. The discovery of Doggerland provides an important lesson. Lost worlds do not necessarily require lost civilizations. Entire inhabited landscapes can disappear through ordinary geological processes. The same pattern occurs elsewhere. In Southeast Asia, lower sea levels expose enormous areas now submerged beneath shallow seas. Across parts of the Mediterranean coastlines shift repeatedly. Along many continental margins, evidence suggests that prehistoric communities once occupied territory, currently hidden beneath water. The record remains incomplete because underwater archaeology is difficult and expensive. Large portions of submerged prehistory remain unexplored, yet enough evidence has emerged to change how historians think about the past. Human history is no longer viewed solely as a story unfolding on modern maps. It is also a story unfolding on landscapes that have vanished. This realization becomes particularly relevant when considering myths, legends, and ancient geographic traditions. Many cultures preserve stories of floods. Many remember lands lost to the sea. Many describe coastlines changing dramatically. For centuries, such accounts are often treated purely as symbolic narratives. Today, researchers sometimes ask whether some of them may contain distant memories of real environmental transformations. The evidence varies from case to case. Some stories are clearly mythological. Others may preserve kernels of historical experience. No single explanation fully accounts for all flood traditions around the world. Yet the broader pattern is difficult to ignore. Human communities repeatedly witness rising seas, shifting coastlines, and environmental change. Those experiences leave cultural traces. The connection to the Piri-Reis map is indirect but intriguing. The map itself does not provide clear evidence of submerged prehistoric landscapes. However, the debates surrounding it encourage researchers to think more broadly about how geographic knowledge survives. Could observations of ancient coastlines persist through oral traditions? Could memories of lost lands influence later stories? Could fragments of geographic information survive long after the physical landscapes themselves disappear? The questions are difficult to answer. Knowledge is fragile. Yet history provides examples of information surviving for surprisingly long periods. Indigenous traditions sometimes preserve details about volcanic eruptions that occurred thousands of years earlier. Oral histories occasionally contain accurate descriptions of environmental events later confirmed through geology. Such cases demonstrate that human memory can be remarkably resilient under certain circumstances. The challenge is determining when those circumstances apply. Researchers therefore proceed carefully. They avoid assuming that every legend represents literal history. They also avoid dismissing every tradition as pure invention. Reality often lies somewhere between those extremes. As investigations continue, another realization emerges. Maps themselves can function as vessels of memory. Not perfect memory, not infallible memory, but memory nonetheless. Every chart preserves decisions about what matters, what is known, and what deserves recording. A map can transmit information across generations long after its creators disappear. This possibility adds another layer to the mystery. Even if the Piri Reis map does not preserve evidence of Antarctica or a lost civilization, it may still contain fragments of geographic traditions whose original contexts have vanished. The surviving document becomes a kind of archaeological site. Instead of buried artifacts, it contains buried information. Researchers excavate its details in hopes of reconstructing the intellectual landscapes from which it emerged. The process reveals something increasingly clear. The true significance of the map may not lie in any single feature. Not a particular coastline, not a disputed landmass, not a sensational theory. Its significance may lie in demonstrating how knowledge survives. Information moves through time in unexpected ways. Documents inherit material from older documents. Cultures preserve ideas from earlier cultures. Observations outlive observers. Maps become repositories of accumulated experience. Some of that experience remains visible. Some has become impossible to fully recover. And that incompleteness may be the most important clue of all, because the history behind the map increasingly resembles the history of humanity itself. A vast network of remembered and forgotten things, a mixture of preservation and loss, a world in which fragments survive while countless other pieces disappear. The question is no longer merely what the map shows. The question is how any knowledge survives at all. And the answer leads directly into one of the most remarkable stories in human history, the journey of information across centuries, empires, languages, and civilizations. Knowledge rarely survives because someone plans for it to survive forever. More often it survives because countless individuals separated by centuries and unaware of one another each make a small decision to preserve something. A scribe copies a manuscript. A navigator keeps an old chart. A scholar translates a text into another language. An archivist stores a document rather than discarding it. A library survives a war. A collection escapes a fire. History is built from these acts of preservation. Without them, the past would be almost entirely silent. The mystery of the Piri Reis map increasingly reveals itself as a story about those fragile chains of survival. Every source used by the Ottoman admiral must first endure long enough to reach him. Every piece of information on the map must pass through multiple hands. Every observation must survive countless opportunities for loss. When researchers begin tracing these pathways, they discover something remarkable. Human civilization functions as a vast network for storing memory. Not perfect memory, not complete memory, but memory on a scale unlike anything found elsewhere in nature. Ideas can outlive individuals. Books can outlive kingdoms. Maps can outlive empires. Knowledge can travel farther through time than the people who create it ever imagine. The process is neither smooth nor guaranteed. Entire civilizations disappear. Languages become unreadable. Archives vanish. Yet fragments continue moving forward. One of the most striking examples comes from the ancient world. Many classical Greek texts survive today not because they remain continuously preserved in a single location, but because they travel across cultures. They are copied, translated, studied, and reinterpreted. At various points, important portions of this knowledge pass through Byzantine, Islamic, and European scholarly traditions. The journey is complex. Sometimes a work survives only because someone translates it into another language. Sometimes a translation becomes the bridge through which an original eventually returns. The transmission of geographic knowledge follows similar patterns. Maps rarely remain static. They evolve. A chart is copied. A coastline is updated. A harbour is added. A mistake is corrected. Another mistake is introduced. Generation after generation contributes to the process. By the time a document reaches the 16th century, it may contain layers originating from many different periods. The Piri Reis map appears to be exactly this sort of layered artifact. It resembles a crossroads where multiple streams of information converge. Some streams originate in recent voyages, others extend deeper into the past. The challenge is determining which is which. Researchers compare cartographic traditions from different regions. They study how geographic ideas spread across the Mediterranean and beyond. The more they investigate, the more interconnected the historical world appears. This realization challenges certain modern assumptions. People often imagine pre-modern societies as isolated and disconnected. In reality, long-distance networks frequently move information across enormous distances. A merchant traveling between ports carries more than cargo. A diplomat carries reports. A pilgrim carries stories. A sailor carries practical observations. Knowledge travels with them. Sometimes the transfer is deliberate. Sometimes it occurs almost accidentally. Either way information moves. The map becomes evidence of this movement. Its existence demonstrates that geographic knowledge from different cultural traditions can eventually be combined into a single document. This synthesis reflects one of the most important characteristics of human history. Civilizations are rarely sealed containers. They interact constantly. Ideas cross boundaries more easily than armies. Knowledge flows through trade routes, migration, scholarship, and exploration. The resulting exchanges shape the development of entire societies. Cartography provides a particularly vivid example because maps visibly accumulate information from many sources. A coastline observed by one culture may later appear in the records of another. A navigational technique developed in one region may spread across oceans. Knowledge becomes shared. Not universally shared, not equally distributed, but shared enough to influence distant places. The evidence remains incomplete, yet what survives strongly suggests that many historical achievements emerge through this process of accumulation rather than isolated invention. The Piri Reis map illustrates that principle beautifully. Its creator openly acknowledges drawing from multiple traditions. He does not claim exclusive ownership of the knowledge he presents. Instead, he assembles information gathered by countless others. In a sense, the map becomes a monument to collective memory. No single person creates the world depicted on its surface. Thousands contribute indirectly. Anonymous sailors, forgotten scribes, unknown cartographers, merchants whose names never enter history, pilots whose charts disappear centuries ago. Their observations survive because later generations continue transmitting them. Most of the individuals vanish. Their knowledge remains. This perspective changes how researchers think about the map's mysteries. Instead of asking whether it contains impossible information, they increasingly ask how information moves through time. That question proves more fruitful. Many apparent puzzles begin making sense once viewed through the lens of transmission. Unexpected details may originate from older source materials. Accurate observations may survive through repeated copying. Errors may persist for the same reason. The map becomes a record not only of knowledge but of knowledge transfer. And transfer is rarely perfect. Information changes as it travels. Words are mistranslated. Measurements are altered. Details are misunderstood. Context disappears. Every generation modifies what it inherits intentionally or not. This process explains why ancient documents often contain mixtures of truth and error. The Piri Reis map is no exception. Its strengths and weaknesses both reveal its history. Accurate features suggest reliable observations. Distortions suggest transmission problems, incomplete data, or conflicting sources. Together, they create a document that feels authentically human. Not magical, not mysterious in a supernatural sense. Mysterious because it emerges from a chain of events too complex to fully reconstruct. And that may be the most enduring lesson. History is not a complete archive. It is a survival process. Some information makes it through. Most does not. The map survives because countless accidents and decisions allow it to survive. Many of its sources do not. Researchers therefore find themselves studying not merely what remains, but what has vanished. Every surviving document implies the existence of others that are gone. Every preserved chart hints at missing charts. Every known tradition suggests forgotten traditions. The historical record resembles a landscape illuminated by scattered points of light. The visible areas are real. The darkness between them is equally important. The Piri Reis map occupies one of those illuminated points, bright enough to attract attention, mysterious enough to inspire investigation, incomplete enough to remind scholars how much remains unknown. As the debate continues, a broader conclusion begins emerging. The map does not stand outside history. It stands at the center of a much larger story, a story about exploration, about communication, about cultural exchange, about the extraordinary ability of human societies to preserve fragments of knowledge across centuries. And as new discoveries continue reshaping our understanding of the ancient world, that larger story is about to become even more significant. Because the map is not the only artifact forcing historians to reconsider what people in the past knew and how far their knowledge could travel. For much of the 20th century, history often appears to move in a familiar direction. New discoveries fill in missing details. A few dates change. A few interpretations are revised. The broad outline remains stable. Then archaeology begins producing surprises at an accelerating pace. Ancient settlements emerge where none are expected. Trade networks prove larger than previously imagined. Maritime connections stretch farther across oceans and seas. Human societies repeatedly demonstrate levels of complexity that challenge older assumptions. The effect is not that history collapses. The effect is that history becomes richer. The Piri Reis map enters this changing intellectual landscape at exactly the right moment. When the document first attracts widespread attention, many people view the ancient world through relatively simple models. Exploration appears limited, communication appears slow, knowledge seems confined within narrow geographic boundaries. As research progresses, those assumptions become harder to maintain. Archaeologists discover evidence of extensive exchange networks operating long before modern transportation. Materials travel astonishing distances. Ideas travel even farther. A piece of obsidian found at an archaeological site may originate hundreds of kilometers away. Exotic goods move through chains of trade connecting multiple societies. Knowledge follows similar routes. The ancient world begins to look increasingly interconnected. Not globally connected in a modern sense, but connected enough to allow information to travel far beyond the communities where it originates. This realization changes how scholars interpret unusual artifacts. A surprising detail no longer automatically requires a revolutionary explanation. Sometimes it simply reflects connections that researchers have not yet fully appreciated. The history of navigation provides a powerful example. For generations, many historians underestimate the capabilities of ancient seafarers. Ocean crossings seem unlikely. Long-distance voyages appear rare. Certain regions are assumed to be more isolated than they actually are. New evidence repeatedly challenges those assumptions. Researchers uncover signs of maritime activity in places once considered inaccessible. Improved dating methods reveal earlier movement of people and goods. Archaeological discoveries demonstrate sophisticated nautical traditions developing in multiple regions. The pattern becomes difficult to ignore. Human beings have always been explorers, not necessarily because they seek glory or conquest, often because they seek food resources, opportunity, or survival. The result is movement, and movement generates knowledge. The implications extend far beyond the map. If information travels more effectively than earlier historians assume, then many historical puzzles become easier to understand. Geographic observations can spread. Navigation techniques can diffuse. Cartographic traditions can interact. The Piri Reis map increasingly appears as evidence of these processes, rather than evidence of something entirely outside them. Yet another factor contributes to changing interpretations: technology. Modern researchers possess tools unimaginable to previous generations. Satellite imagery reveals ancient river systems hidden beneath deserts. Remote sensing identifies buried settlements. Underwater surveys map submerged landscapes. Digital analysis allows precise comparison between historical maps and modern geography. Each new tool expands the available evidence. Sometimes long-standing assumptions are confirmed. Sometimes they are overturned. The process remains ongoing. One of the most dramatic examples involves the Sahara. Today the desert appears immense and unforgiving. Yet geological and archaeological research reveals that large portions of it are not always dry. During earlier periods, lakes, rivers, and grasslands support human populations across regions now dominated by sand. The transformation is extraordinary. Entire environments appear and disappear over time. The lesson is important. Modern landscapes are not permanent. The world visible today is only one version of Earth. Past generations inhabit environments that can look dramatically different. This realization helps explain why certain ancient traditions occasionally seem puzzling to modern observers. Descriptions that appear unrealistic may sometimes reflect landscapes that no longer exist. Not mythical landscapes, real ones, lost through environmental change. The same principle applies to coastlines, rivers, forests, and wetlands throughout the world. History unfolds on a moving stage. The stage itself changes. Maps become especially valuable because they occasionally preserve snapshots of those changes. The Piri-Reis map is not ancient enough to record Ice Age coastlines directly. Yet the debates surrounding it encourage scholars to think more broadly about how geographic information survives. A chart created in one century may preserve observations from another. Knowledge may outlast the conditions that originally produced it. This possibility becomes increasingly relevant as researchers uncover evidence of long-term cultural memory. In some cases, traditions survive for extraordinary lengths of time. Stories pass through generations. Environmental knowledge persists. Practical information remains useful and therefore continues to be transmitted. The mechanisms vary. The principle remains consistent. Human societies remember more than they are often given credit for. At the same time, they forget enormous amounts. This combination of memory and loss lies at the heart of the map's significance. The document survives. Most of its sources do not. Researchers reconstruct the past using fragments. The resulting picture is necessarily incomplete. Yet incompleteness does not mean ignorance. Every decade adds new information. New archaeological discoveries reshape old debates. New analytical techniques reveal previously invisible patterns. History is constantly being revised not because it is unreliable, but because evidence continues accumulating. The Piri-Reis map becomes a symbol of this process. Its meaning evolves as knowledge evolves. Early interpretations emphasize mystery. Later studies emphasize context. Neither perspective is entirely wrong. The map genuinely contains puzzles. It also exists within a comprehensible historical framework. The tension between those realities keeps the discussion alive. Perhaps the most important change, however, involves perspective. Researchers increasingly move away from asking whether the map proves something extraordinary. Instead, they ask what the map reveals about ordinary historical processes operating on an extraordinary scale. How does information travel? How is knowledge preserved? Why do some records survive while others vanish? How interconnected are ancient societies? These questions produce insights far more durable than any single theory, and the answers continue expanding. The map no longer stands alone as a curiosity. It becomes part of a broader pattern, a pattern showing that human history is more connected, more complex, and often more surprising than earlier generations imagined. The implications reach beyond cartography. They touch every aspect of the past. Because whenever archaeologists uncover a forgotten city, decipher an ancient text, or identify a lost trade route, the same lesson emerges. The historical world is larger than the surviving record. And somewhere within that larger world lies the true significance of the map, a significance that extends far beyond any disputed coastline. By the beginning of the 21st century, the map has become something far larger than a historical document. It has become an idea. For historians, it remains an intriguing artifact from the early 16th century. For cartographers, it offers insight into the transmission of geographic knowledge. For archaeologists, it raises questions about the survival of information across centuries. For the public, however, the map often occupies a different space entirely. It becomes a symbol of hidden history, a symbol of forgotten knowledge, a symbol of the possibility that the past still contains secrets waiting to be uncovered. This transformation is fascinating because it reveals as much about the modern world as it does about the ancient one. Human beings have always been attracted to mysteries, not merely because mysteries are entertaining, but because they challenge the boundaries of what is known. Every genuine discovery begins as a question. Every major archaeological breakthrough begins with uncertainty. The map exists permanently within that territory. It is mysterious enough to inspire curiosity, documented enough to resist pure fantasy, complex enough to support decades of debate. As a result, it becomes a cultural phenomenon. Books are written about it. Television programs feature it. Writers propose explanations ranging from careful scholarship to extravagant speculation. The document enters popular culture. And once a historical artifact enters popular culture, its story often develops a life of its own. This process occurs repeatedly throughout history. Ancient monuments acquire legends. Archaeological sites become surrounded by myths. Historical figures transform into larger-than-life characters. The Piri race map follows a similar path. Certain claims are repeated so often that they begin sounding established even when the evidence remains weak. Speculations become detached from their original context. Nuances disappear. The result is a strange dual existence. There is the actual map study by researchers, and there is the legendary map discussed by the public. The two overlap, but they are not identical. Scholars continue emphasizing caution. They point out uncertainties. They identify limitations. They distinguish between supported conclusions and unsupported possibilities. Popular accounts often prefer more dramatic narratives. Lost continents attract more attention than cartographic methodology. Ancient mysteries attract more attention than archival research. This difference is understandable. One story promises revelation. The other promises complexity. Yet complexity is often where the most interesting truths reside. The real historical significance of the map emerges not from proving impossible things, but from illustrating how knowledge moves through civilizations. The document demonstrates that information can travel astonishing distances. It shows that cultures borrow from one another. It reveals that maps are cumulative creations rather than isolated inventions. These lessons may lack the excitement of a hidden prehistoric empire, but they tell a far richer story about human achievement. Because the actual history is remarkable enough. Consider the chain required to create the map. Observations are gathered across oceans and coastlines. Charts are drawn. Copies are made. Documents pass through multiple languages. Empires rise and fall. Knowledge survives political upheaval. Cartographers compare sources from different traditions. Eventually, a single document emerges containing traces of countless lives and journeys. That process is extraordinary. It reflects the collective effort of generations. The map becomes a monument not to a lost civilization but to human continuity, to the persistence of curiosity, to the desire to understand the world, and to the determination to preserve that understanding for those who come later. These themes help explain why the map continues attracting attention long after many similar documents fade into obscurity. It touches fundamental questions. How much of the past has been lost? How much survives unnoticed? How many discoveries remain hidden in archives, collections, and archaeological sites? The answers remain uncertain. History repeatedly demonstrates that significant discoveries can emerge unexpectedly. Forgotten manuscripts reappear. Shipwrecks are located. Ancient settlements are uncovered. Texts thought lost forever are identified in damaged fragments. The historical record is still incomplete. In some ways it always will be. This fact encourages both humility and optimism. Humility because scholars must acknowledge the limits of available evidence. Optimism because future discoveries may illuminate areas that currently remain obscure. The map occupies that balance perfectly. It reminds researchers how much has vanished. It reminds them how much has survived. Most importantly, it reminds them that the boundary between the two is often thinner than it appears. A single surviving document can preserve traces of entire traditions otherwise lost. A single fragment can open unexpected windows into the past. The rediscovery of the map itself proves the point. For centuries it rests quietly within an archive. Countless people pass by it. Few recognize its significance. Then circumstances change. Researchers examine it more closely. Questions emerge. Debates begin. The document enters history again. Its second life proves almost as influential as its first. This journey from obscurity to fame carries an important lesson. Historical significance is not always obvious. Sometimes the most valuable artifacts are not the grandest or most beautiful. Sometimes they are the ones that preserve connections. Connections between cultures. Connections between generations. Connections between known history and the vast territory that remains uncertain. The Piri Reis map excels at creating such connections. Every line on its surface links one observer to another. Every annotation points toward vanished sources. Every debate surrounding it encourages deeper investigation into the history of exploration, navigation, and knowledge itself. That may be why fascination with the map endures. Not because it solves a mystery, because it preserves one. And the best historical mysteries are not those that promise impossible answers. They are those that reveal how much more there is to learn. As researchers continue studying the map, a broader conclusion gradually emerges. The document does not rewrite history in the dramatic way often claimed. Its contribution is subtler, and perhaps more important, it changes the questions historians ask. Instead of viewing the past as a collection of isolated civilizations, it encourages them to see networks. Instead of focusing only on discoveries, it highlights transmission. Instead of emphasizing what is known, it draws attention to what survives and what does not. Those insights continue shaping research long after the debates themselves evolve, and they lead naturally toward the final question. After centuries of discussion, speculation, investigation, and analysis, what exactly did the map change? After all the debates, all the theories, all the arguments about coastlines and lost sources, the answer turns out to be both simpler and more profound than many people expect. The map does not overturn history. It does not prove the existence of a forgotten global civilization. It does not demonstrate that Antarctica was mapped in prehistoric times. It does not reveal secret technologies hidden in the distant past. What it changes is something subtler. It changes perspective. For generations, history is often told as a sequence of isolated achievements. One civilization discovers something, another invents something, a third explores somewhere new. The story moves forward in neat stages. The Piri Reis map resists that narrative. Every feature of the document points in a different direction, toward accumulation, toward exchange, toward the gradual gathering of knowledge across centuries and across cultures. The map reminds historians that information rarely belongs to a single place or a single time. Knowledge travels. It crosses political borders. It survives the collapse of states. It moves through trade routes, libraries, ports, archives, and personal collections. Sometimes it survives by chance. Sometimes it survives because someone recognizes its value. Sometimes it survives for reasons no one can fully reconstruct. The map itself is evidence of this process. Piri Reis does not present himself as the sole creator of the knowledge he records. He openly acknowledges using earlier sources. Those sources draw from still earlier traditions. Behind every line on the parchment stand generations of observers whose names are largely forgotten. That realization fundamentally changes how the document is understood. Its significance lies not in a single mystery but in a network of connections. A Portuguese chart influences an Ottoman map. Ancient geographic traditions survive through medieval transmission. Observations made by sailors in distant waters become part of a larger body of knowledge. The resulting picture is far more interconnected than the older narrative of isolated civilizations. Modern scholarship increasingly reflects this understanding. Researchers studying ancient trade migration, navigation, and communication repeatedly discover evidence of extensive interaction. Ideas move farther than expected. Technologies spread through unexpected channels. Information travels along routes that are only now becoming visible. The map becomes part of that broader story. It demonstrates how difficult it can be to trace the origins of knowledge once it has passed through many hands. A coastline appears on a chart. Where does it come from? A harbour is recorded. Who first observed it? A geographic detail survives. How many generations carried that information forward? Often there is no definitive answer. The evidence remains incomplete. Yet the absence of complete certainty does not diminish the importance of the question. In fact, it enhances it, because historical inquiry is rarely about achieving perfect knowledge. It is about understanding the pathways through which knowledge survives. The map excels at illuminating those pathways. Its mysteries force scholars to investigate lost archives, forgotten charts, maritime traditions, and networks of cultural exchange. Even when particular theories prove incorrect, the research they inspire often reveals valuable insights. That may be the most enduring contribution of the document. It encourages curiosity, not the kind of curiosity that leaps immediately to extraordinary conclusions, but the kind that follows evidence patiently through complexity. Again and again, the map teaches the same lesson. Reality is usually more complicated than legend, yet reality is often just as fascinating. The actual story behind the map involves sailors crossing dangerous seas, cartographers comparing conflicting reports, scholars preserving fragments of older knowledge, and civilizations exchanging information over enormous distances. No mythical explanation is required. Human history itself provides more than enough wonder. The document also highlights another truth that extends far beyond cartography. History is fundamentally incomplete. Every archive contains gaps. Every civilization loses records. Every generation inherits only part of what came before. Researchers work with fragments. Sometimes those fragments fit together neatly. Sometimes they do not. The Piri Reis map survives precisely because it is a fragment. Most of the original document is gone. Many of its sources are gone. Much of the world that produced it has vanished into the past. Yet enough remains to reveal something important. The survival of knowledge is never guaranteed. What exists today represents only a fraction of what once existed. This realization encourages humility. It reminds historians to avoid assuming that the surviving record tells the entire story. At the same time, it encourages appreciation. Every surviving document becomes more valuable when viewed against the vast backdrop of what has been lost. The map's journey illustrates this beautifully. Created in 1513, preserved through centuries of political change, stored within archives, largely forgotten, rediscovered, studied, debated, questioned, celebrated, criticized, and ultimately recognized as one of the most intriguing cartographic artifacts of its era. Not because it answers every question, because it generates them. The greatest historical discoveries often work this way. They do not close investigations. They open new ones. The map continues doing exactly that. Researchers still examine its details. Historians still debate aspects of its origins. Cartographers still analyze its methods. The conversation remains active because the document sits at the intersection of so many important themes: exploration, memory, transmission, preservation, loss, curiosity, humanity's attempt to understand the world. In that sense, the map becomes more than a chart. It becomes a reflection of the species that created it, a species endlessly collecting information, endlessly sharing it, endlessly losing parts of it. and endlessly trying to recover what has disappeared. The parchment itself may be old. The impulse behind it remains remarkably familiar. People still map the unknown. People still gather fragments of evidence. People still search for connections between scattered pieces of information. The tools have changed. The desire has not. That desire is what ultimately rewrites history. Not a single map, not a single discovery, but the continuing human effort to look beyond the horizon and ask what lies there. The Piri Reis map survives as one chapter in that larger story. A chapter filled with mysteries, misunderstandings, genuine achievements, and unanswered questions. A chapter reminding us that the past is never entirely settled, and that even a forgotten piece of parchment can alter the way people see the world. The map eventually returns to silence. After centuries of debate, countless books, endless theories, and generations of investigation, it remains what it has always been, a fragile fragment of preserved knowledge. Ink on parchment, lines tracing coastlines, notes written by a man who could never have imagined the attention his work would one day receive. Yet the silence surrounding the map feels different now. Not empty, thoughtful. The document no longer appears as a puzzle waiting for a single dramatic solution. Instead, it becomes part of a much larger landscape stretching across thousands of years of human experience. Across that landscape, civilizations rise and fall. Libraries fill and disappear. Ships leave harbours and vanish beyond horizons. Maps are drawn, copied, revised, forgotten and rediscovered. Knowledge survives in fragments. Sometimes a fragment is enough. A surviving chart hints at lost charts. A surviving text hints at lost texts. A surviving memory hints at forgotten worlds. History advances through these traces, never complete, never perfect, yet endlessly revealing. The coastlines on the map remind us that the earth itself is never still. Seas rise, rivers shift, landscapes change. Places that once seemed permanent fade away. Entire environments disappear beneath water or sand. Human memory follows a similar pattern. Some stories endure, others vanish. Most exist somewhere between remembrance and forgetting. The map survives because it occupies that narrow space where memory manages to outlast time. And perhaps that is its deepest lesson. Not that the past hides impossible secrets. Not that ancient people possessed magical knowledge. But that every generation inherits fragments from those who came before. Fragments of information. Fragments of experience. Fragments of understanding. The challenge is learning how to read them. Far beyond the archives where the map once rested, coastlines continue meeting the sea. Ships continue crossing oceans. New maps continue being made. The horizon remains where it has always been, just beyond reach, inviting another journey. And somewhere between what is known and what is forgotten, the old map still waits, carrying its quiet reminder that history is not a finished story, but a landscape that reveals itself a little more with every generation that chooses to look.